Hello, I'm Tom Marsden, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today about workforce transformation and what we can learn from technology companies. I'm the CEO at Saberr. My background before that was working around 10 years in finance, then management consulting for about 15 years in the talent space. So I've been working both from the technology side and also dealing with talent management issues for the best part of 20 years. And I'm keen to explore what I think are some really exciting things that we can establish from technology companies as we move into this strange new world of work we're all living in at the moment. So the session today, I'm going to talk a little bit just by opening with the obvious, saying the world has changed and how that it's going to affect us. And then we're going to look at sort of three areas where I think there's a lot we can learn from how technology companies are adapting to ways of working. We're going to be speaking about how technology companies are working remote, how they're working agile, and how they're working digital. But I'm also going to just end with a little note of caution about the danger of hubris or believing our own hype, and some things we might want to consider as we move forward if we are working in a technology company ourselves. So as I say, I'm going to start by stating the obvious that the world of work has changed forever. I don't think I've spoken to any leader of a business, and I've spoken to quite a few over the last 6 months, that doesn't believe that the way we work is going to profoundly change as we move forward. I think it's going to change our offices, it's going to change how we work together, it's going to change even the cities we live in as we adapt to a different way of working, where hopefully we adopt some of the good practices that we've managed to pick up through a very difficult time. But I think this question about what this new normal looks like remains pretty open still. And I think the question we're going to be discussing today is, well, what lessons are there from technology companies that we can learn? And to kind of frame this, I think it's worth just picking up this quote from Gary Hamel, the leadership writer, who said, many companies have 21st century technology, they have mid-20th century management practices, processes, but they're built atop 19th century management principles. And what he meant by that was that many of the practices we've been working with, whether it's the 9-to-5 structure or some of the ways that we think about working processes, are really, really old. The org chart, for example, is one that I think a lot of people think is pretty long in the tooth in terms of sort of thinking about how do we visualize work and what are the management principles that underpin how we work. So there's an exciting moment now which we have to rethink some of those management principles. So one of the first, potentially most obvious ones is about where we work and the opportunity to work remote. And I want to sort of introduce this by saying that, it's impossible to view different industries in the same light here. This is a study from McKinsey that looked at different industries and the ability to work remotely, and also sort of the current need. And what was pretty obvious is that there are some industries like hospitality, entertainment, and social care, where the ability to work remote was pretty constrained. And there are other industries like software, professional services, telco, for example, which really had significant opportunity to work remote. And so, there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. That all of the practices that technology companies have been using can be applied generally. The context of the industry you're working in and the company you're working in will be key. Having said that, there are some fantastic case studies of companies that have been working remote for 10 years and more, And it would be crazy, in my view, not to learn the lessons from these companies. So, to mention a couple, like Buffer have written extensively on communication practices for remote workers, and they've got some fantastic insight that we can learn from. Or GitLab, for example, who have been one of the largest, over 1,000 people working remotely around the world. They have codified much of their practice and talk really eloquently about the power of writing down decisions and the importance of writing down decisions when you're working remote. And great insight in terms of the power of the written word for remote workers. So it would be crazy not to pick up the lessons learned from people who've been doing this for over a decade. And many of them, as I've said, have actually codified those into playbooks. GitLab have a great remote playbook. We ourselves at Saberr have a playbook on our website. So I think a lot of technology companies are keen to share these working practices. They're available, and I think actually GitLab have even launched a Coursera course that you can do about managing remote teams. So there's some fantastic material to leverage, and we should. I would say also that many of the problems of remote teams are not that different from co-located teams in terms of how we manifest themselves. Some of you might know Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and he in April launched his 5 Dysfunctions of a Virtual Team. And the dysfunctions are the same. It's just we need to think differently about how to solve them. And there's a paper here from one of Google's guide to distributed and remote working, where it talks about some of the things we need to do in terms of setting team norms, in terms of understanding differences. And again, those are true whether you're in a co-located team or a remote team. It's just the mechanism by which you set team norms, or you start to probe and understand differences in a team of what different people's working styles or their personality or their values and how they're showing up differently. The way you do that when you're working remote will be different. So the fundamentals of teamwork haven't changed. The fundamentals of leading teams hasn't changed, but we need to think differently about how we enable some of these solutions. I think one of the really interesting areas when you're working remote is how to drive innovation. This is some research by Sandy Pentland, who's a professor at MIT. And he talks about 3 key things for getting the best out of your team. Energy, which is the amount of communication and the quality of the communication. Engagement, which is a factor of whether that communication within a team is evenly distributed or it's really just within an isolated few. And exploration is around communication outside the team. So does the team go outside the team to bring new information in? And in looking at the importance of communication patterns in teams, we're shifting all of this communication online. And one of the takeaways from Pentland's research is that actually we know that the most valuable form of communication is face-to-face, and particularly when you're looking to drive innovation. And so I think one of the big challenges we face is when we're looking to move on to a remote environment, how do we continue to drive high quality communication that drives an innovation agenda, which has been done face-to-face in the past? And so what many companies are looking at is now some sort of hybrid model. Can we, on the one end, if we look at the sort of different spectrums, on the one end, we've got almost entirely on premises, which is very difficult for most companies, and many companies are saying they're not going to go back to that. On the other hand, we've got some of those models that we talked about, like GitLab, which are entirely off premises. And I think what you're optimizing for will drive your agenda of where you sit on this new model. Are you looking to access talent? Are you looking to drive down the cost of your real estate? or are you looking to drive productivity? And I would separate productivity from innovation here. And I think the nature of your business and what you're looking to drive will affect how you think about the new remote structure. And I think this is an area where we're going to see continued innovation from technology companies. There are some good practices out there, but I think we're going to see a lot more innovation and a lot more written up about how people are trying to adopt this hybrid model of working. And a hybrid model can bring challenges. These were sort of two quotes from recent articles, one in the Financial Times, which talked about a technology company that had moved to a hybrid model. And they said it was really hard actually to avoid the sort of in-crowd versus at-home crowd problem, where you had two camps. And so sort of finding solutions where you can have some people in the office, but you're not creating an in-crowd and an out-crowd is going to be, I think, one significant challenge to face. And also, I think, this quote from McKinsey about informal interactions, which were kind of naturally happening amongst co-located employees, but don't happen as easily in a remote environment, in a virtual environment, is also key. How do we create those water cooler moments where you can kind of spark off each other and you drive particularly that sort of innovation agenda? So I've been on calls where there have been technology companies looking at kind of creating accidental encounters within a business, for example. Is that something we're going to see more of, where you create chance encounters in a kind of randomized approach with a virtual coffee? So ideas like that, I think we'll see more. There are some emerging, but we're going to see a lot more innovation in this space. So if technology companies have been leading the way and setting some ideas around how we work remote, they've also been leading the Agile agenda for many years. And Agile, as I'm sure most people know, was actually originated as a software development manifesto, but it's actually become a much broader theory of management practice as well. I'm particularly keen on this book by Stephen Denning, The Age of Agile, which talks about Agile as a management practice and three laws that he thinks sort of underpin Agile as a more of a sort of broader management framework. The first one is the law of the small team, that we need to sort of empower small teams to get work done. The second is the law of the customer, the need to ruthlessly focus on the customer in driving innovation. And the third is the law of the network, the fact that it's not just teams in isolation, but it's networks of teams working together that are going to solve problems. And I think in all of these areas, technology companies have been demonstrating just how much value you could provide through working Agile. But Agile is still at an early stage of maturity. In this survey, around 84% of companies that were surveyed said that they were still in a pretty early stage in terms of building their capability to work Agile. And I think also, what we're starting to see is sort of the Agile mindset being applied not only in software development and IT, but in areas like operations, marketing, and HR. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I think that that technology companies have a very, very important role in terms of sort of explaining the benefits and principles of Agiles more broadly. And I think one thing that has happened when I speak to companies that are in the non-technology sphere, sometimes there's a disconnect between management practices, which are still sort of more traditional, and Agile innovation in software teams or in IT teams, for example. And I think the importance of having Agile from top to bottom, from how your management team are thinking through to how teams on the ground are thinking, is imperative. So this is definitely an area I think there is a lot to learn from how technologies have embraced Agile, across the business. And some of the practices that this was a survey of changes that we might need in organizations stemming from COVID. And I think a lot of what the practices that were referred to speak to sort of moving towards a more agile approach to management. So changing meeting structure and cadence, particularly moving to shorter cycle times, rethinking how leaders lead day to day, rethinking use of technology and driving different core processes, I think all speak to some agile practices which have been established in technology company for some time. One example would be the core process of setting goals, and how agile firms have rethought the goal setting process, adopting in some cases this idea of objectives and key results, or OKRs, where you are trying to basically achieve great focus through goal setting and alignment across the business, but combining both top-down goal setting and bottom-up goal setting, and giving the teams the autonomy to create their own objectives and key results. Having the transparency provided by having every team with clear OKRs, and critically moving that goal setting process into a shorter iterations and cycle times. And I think the adoption of OKRs, which is much stronger in technology companies, I'm also seeing that happening in a lot of other companies that are looking, maybe not adopting OKRs in their entirety, but at least moving towards this idea of much shorter iterations of goal setting, certainly moving beyond the sort of, the annual budget and the annual strategic cycle, to, typically quarterly or even monthly goal setting cycles. So this is an area I think we'll see more innovation in non-technology companies adopting kind of a different goal setting cycle. Another area I think is in changing the reframing the role of the manager. So the survey talked about in COVID times, we're having to rethink what it means to lead. And this is a quote from a book that Eric Schmidt and others wrote about Bill Campbell, one of the most famous management coaches in Silicon Valley. But one of the key takeaways was that actually the right coach for most teams is the manager. And that it's not possible or practical to hire a coach for every team in the company, nor is it the right answer, because the best coach for any team is the manager who leads the team. And I think this idea, this reframing of the manager as coach, or sort of inverted leadership, where sort of more servant leadership, where the manager is needing to enable the team to perform, is something that we have seen in some, not all, but in some companies, technology companies, alongside agile practices, that has been very successful applied, and requires constant effort in training and empowering managers to take that role, because it's a challenging role to take. So we've seen how technology companies are driving the remote agenda, how they're driving an agile agenda. I think the third, potentially most obvious way that technology companies can demonstrate how we come out of COVID is through sort of digital transformation. So there was a joke being posted on Twitter, the sort of, who led your digital transformation of your company? Was it the CEO, CTO, or COVID? And there's no question that COVID has led one of the most dramatic transformations in the digital landscape of the last 20, 30 years. Things like Microsoft Teams adoption, which in one period through lockdown had 30 million users on Teams. So really, very, very significant adoption of quite a core platform to think differently about how you're communicating with your teams. And certainly a lot of the people we speak to have adopted Teams or Slack as the other kind of base communication platform that we see as a sort of foundation platform. And Slack had an interesting piece of research that they produced, where they were talking about team to market and the ability of collaboration tools like Slack or Teams to enable fluid, rapid, and flexible team formation. And this idea of fast teaming and how technology enables fast teaming, where people can come together on a project, work through it, group together and reform, is something that I think has been around in technology environments for some years, in professional services environments. But I think now pretty much all companies are needing to think in this way, where, how can we enable teams to come together, form, solve problems, and then disband, and that those cycles are much shorter than they've been in the past. So I think one of the things that technology companies are quite good at is pulling together the technology stack for a new world of work. So this is the stack we use at Saberr, using sort of Zoom for synchronous communication, Slack for asynchronous. We use our own product CoachBot for checking in on the teams and driving much more consistency of working practices through teamwork. And then, things like Miro for online brainstorming collaboration. And I think technology companies are quite good at putting together these technology stacks. And this is something that all companies will need to do going forward in the new world of work. But I really like this quote at a conference I attended recently, which said that successful remote work is 80% culture and only 20% tools. And I couldn't agree with that more. So I think, putting the technology stack together is a great starting point. But the key to this is going to be kind of creating the culture of collaboration in your business. And I think, that just by a note of caution to end, I do think, if we look back over the last 15 years of technology company growth, there have been some fantastic achievements in the growth of technology companies and how they've used these principles of working remotely, of working agile, of leveraging digital transformation. And that's great. But there have also been, some failures where the culture really hasn't lived up to those working practices. And I think it's really, really important that there's a sort of humility amongst technology companies, and I count Saberr in this absolutely ourselves. We things like we know we don't have the level of diversity in our leadership positions that we want, and I think it's really, really important that every company focuses primarily on culture and how that will enable the new world of work, and that culture will be different in each company. But this is an area I think technology companies need to look at the diversity agenda. They need to look at gender representation and take a long, hard look as well. So there's a lot to learn as well as a lot to teach. I think for technology companies going forward. So that's a quick tour through my perspective on what we can learn from technology companies. I think the approach that they've taken for working remotely, for working agile, and for leveraging digital tools, there is a ton to learn. But also I think, culture eats strategy for lunch, as one person famously said. And I think the key to this is, can we come out of COVID with a culture that we believe and aspire to be part of? And that's a challenge for every organization. Many thanks. I look forward to hearing some questions in the Q&A session after this. Bye-bye.